I knew something was off the second I stepped into the house. It was just a little too perfect, too curated. The way the modern, black and white photos hung at symmetrical angles on the walls, the faint citrusy clean scent lingering in the air, and the welcome note propped neatly against a vase of fake flowers. "Welcome, Ellie. Make yourself at home." I wasn't a rookie when it came to Airbnb. I traveled a lot for work and stayed in dozens of them a year. But this one, a Victorian-style house in a quiet part of Savannah, felt staged, sterile even, like someone had dressed up an empty dollhouse and hoped no one would notice the cracks in the foundation. Still, it was late and I was too exhausted to overthink it. My boss had thrown a last-minute trip at me, 3 nights in town for a regional conference, and this listing was the only option in my budget that wasn't 40 minutes from the venue. The reviews were glowing, too. Things like, "spotless," and "the best host I've ever had," peppered the page. Yet, as I carried my bag upstairs to the bedroom, something tugged at the back of my mind, whispering, "You're not supposed to be here." I tried to shake it off. The bedroom was just as meticulously staged as the rest of the house. A pale blue duvet folded neatly over a 4-poster bed, an antique mirror hanging over a dark mahogany dresser. But as I set my suitcase down, I noticed something weird. The mirror wasn't reflecting the room correctly. I turned to look at it, and my stomach dropped. It showed the room, sure, but it was slightly off. The duvet on the bed was wrinkled in the reflection, but smooth in reality. The curtains fluttered faintly in the mirror as if a breeze was blowing, but the air in the room was still. I froze. "Okay," I said to myself. "It's probably just some old, warped glass." But as I watched the reflection longer, I noticed something else. My reflection wasn't perfectly synced with me. There was a fraction of a second delay when I raised my arm, like it had to think about moving before it actually did. The air in the room grew heavy. I stepped back and grabbed my phone, snapping a picture of the mirror. The photo came out normal. No delay, no weird reflections. Just me, standing in the room, looking like a paranoid idiot. So, I brushed it off as travel fatigue and decided to take a shower before bed. The bathroom was pristine. White subway tiles lined the walls, and a clawfoot tub sat in the center like something out of a Pinterest board. I was starting to feel more at ease, chalking up my earlier weirdness to an overactive imagination. I had just stepped into the steaming water when I heard it. A creak. Not the kind of faint groan old houses make when they settle, but the distinct sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving across the floor above me. I froze, shampoo dripping into my eyes, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. But then it came again, louder this time. Step, step, step. There wasn't supposed to be anyone else here. I jumped out of the tub, grabbed the towel, and tiptoed to the door, heart pounding in my chest. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. No response. I opened the door a crack and peered into the hall. The house was silent, except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. I crept up the staircase, towel wrapped tightly around me, each step creaking louder than the last. When I reached the second floor, the air felt different, thick, stifling. The door to the bedroom I had just left was wide open, though I was sure I had closed it. Inside, the bed was no longer made. The duvet was tossed onto the floor, and the antique mirror now faced the wall. And on the bed, pair of muddy footprints. I stood there, towel clutched to my chest, every nerve in my body screaming for me to get out of the house. But I didn't. Instead, I stepped into the bedroom, my breath shallow and quick. I needed to see for myself. I needed to make sense of it. Maybe someone had been here the whole time. Maybe I wasn't alone. But how? The locks hadn't been tampered with, and the house was in a quiet cul-de-sac. I walked to the bed, staring at the footprints. They were uneven, as if someone had been limping. One print was smudged, toes dragging across the sheet. My stomach twisted at the sight. I glanced at the mirror now facing the wall. I don't know why, but I felt compelled to turn it back around. My hand shook as I grabbed the wooden frame and tilted it toward me. And there I was in the reflection, hair dripping, pale, eyes wide with fear. But something was wrong. The room behind me in the mirror didn't match the room I was standing in. The duvet was still on the bed in the reflection, perfectly smooth. The footprints weren't there. And behind me, reflected in the mirror but not visible in the real room, stood a man. He was tall and gaunt, his face obscured by shadow, but his eyes, they were hollow, empty, and they were fixed on me. I stumbled back with a scream, dropping the mirror. It shattered on the floor, shards scattering across the room. The sound was deafening, like a gunshot in the quiet house. I spun around, expecting to see the man behind me, but the room was empty. I scrambled out of the bedroom, nearly slipping on the hardwood floor as I ran back down the stairs. My mind was racing. Should I call the police? Would they even believe me? What would I tell them? That my reflection was haunted. As I reached the bottom step, I froze. The front door was wide open. I knew I had locked it when I arrived. I was meticulous about it. Traveling alone, you don't take chances. "Hello," I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. Still nothing. But then I noticed something else. Something that made my blood run cold. The welcome note on the small table near the door was gone. In its place was a different piece of paper. It looked hastily torn from a notebook, the edges jagged. I picked it up with shaking hands. The handwriting was jagged, almost childlike, and the message was simple. "You're not supposed to be here." I didn't even grab my things. I bolted out of the house, barefoot and dripping wet, and ran to my car. My breath came in ragged gasps as I fumbled with the keys, my hands slick with sweat. The engine roared to life, and I peeled out of the driveway, not caring if I left skid marks on the perfectly paved cul-de-sac. But as I sped down the dark street, I glanced in the rearview mirror, and my heart stopped. The house wasn't empty. In one of the upstairs windows, I saw him, the man from the mirror, watching me, and he was smiling. I didn't stop driving. I didn't even breathe until I was halfway across town, pulling into the safety of a brightly lit gas station. My hands trembled as I parked, the engine still running, headlights cutting into the night. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My face was pale, my eyes red and wild. But there was nothing behind me now, no shadowy figure, no hollow eyes. It was just me. For a moment, I considered calling the police. But what would I say? "Hi, I think my Airbnb is haunted?" They'd either laugh or chalk me up as a crazy lady who'd seen too many horror movies. So instead, I grabbed my phone. I needed to get my stuff back. My work laptop, my clothes, everything was still inside that house. I opened the Airbnb app, my thumb hovering over the listing. I figured I could message the host, tell them something was wrong, and maybe they'd send someone to check it out. But when I tapped the listing, my heart sank. The listing was gone. It wasn't just booked up. It had been completely removed from the platform. I stared at the screen, scrolling back and forth as if the app would magically bring it back. But it didn't. My reservation was still listed under my account, but when I tapped it, an error message popped up. "This listing is no longer available." I sat there, trying to calm myself down. Maybe it was a glitch. Maybe the host had just taken it down while I was staying there. That had to be it, right? But then I got an email notification. The sender was Airbnb, and the subject line read, "Your reservation has been canceled." I opened it, my stomach twisting into knots. "Dear Ellie," it began, "we regret to inform you that your reservation at redacted address has been canceled due to unforeseen circumstances. A full refund has been issued to your account. We apologize for the inconvenience." That was it. No explanation. No contact info for the host. Just a refund and a pat on the head. I knew something was wrong. Airbnb doesn't just cancel active reservations like that. And then I noticed something else. The timestamp on the email was from 30 minutes ago. Around the same time I'd left the house. Someone had canceled it while I was still there. Couldn't go back. Not alone. I decided to call my coworker, Jason, who was also in Savannah for the conference. Jason wasn't the brightest bulb, but he was dependable and, more importantly, he was built like a linebacker. "Ellie?" he answered groggily after a few rings. Jason, I need your help, I said, my voice shaking. What's going on? You sound... I'll explain when you get here. Can you meet me at the gas station off Elmwood? Please. He paused, probably debating whether or not to humor me. Yeah, all right. Gimme 10 minutes. Jason pulled into the gas station a few minutes later, his beat-up Jeep screeching to a stop next to my car. He rolled down the window, his brow furrowed. You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost, he said, half joking. I'm not sure that I haven't, I muttered. I explained everything, well, almost everything. I didn't mention the mirror or the man in the window. Instead, I told him someone had been in the house, and I needed to grab my things before getting the hell out of Savannah. Jason raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. All right, he said, cracking his knuckles. Let's go. When we pulled up to the house, I almost didn't recognize it. The lights were all off. The cheerful welcome mat was gone, and the place seemed to sink into the shadows like it didn't belong there, like it had been abandoned for years. Are you sure this is the place? Jason asked, glancing at me. Positive, I said, though the doubt in my voice was palpable. We approached the front door, and that's when I noticed the scratches. Long, jagged gouges carved into the wood, as if someone or something had clawed at it. My stomach turned. Jason tried the handle. It was unlocked. We stepped inside, and the smell hit us immediately. Damp, musty, and faintly metallic, like rust or blood. This place is giving me the creeps, Jason muttered. We headed upstairs to the bedroom where my stuff was. The mirror was still shattered on the floor, shards glinting faintly in the moonlight streaming through the window. But my suitcase, my laptop, gone. The room was empty, save for the broken glass and the bed stripped of its sheets. Ellie, Jason said, his voice tight. I turned to see him staring at the wall, his face pale. What? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He pointed. Scrawled across the wall, in what looked like deep, jagged scratches, were 3 words. You brought him. Jason was already backing toward the door. Ellie, he whispered, his voice trembling. What the hell is this? I don't know, I stammered. My eyes were glued to the scratches on the wall. They weren't random. The edges of the letters were so sharp, almost deliberate, as if carved by something that wanted to make sure I understood. You brought him. Brought who? Jason grabbed my arm, snapping me out of my trance. We need to go. Now. He pulled me out of the room, his grip tight. As we hurried down the stairs, something caught my attention. A sound. It was faint at first, like a low hum or a buzz, coming from somewhere deep in the house. Do you hear that? I asked, stopping at the foot of the stairs. Jason froze, tilting his head. His eyes widened. Yeah. What the hell is that? The sound grew louder. It wasn't a hum, it was a voice. A low, guttural whisper. Words I couldn't quite make out. It seemed to be coming from behind us. We spun around, staring up the staircase. The bedroom door, which had been wide open moments ago, was now slowly closing. And behind it, I swear, I saw movement. Jason didn't wait to find out what it was. He bolted for the front door, dragging me along. Come on, Ellie. I stumbled after him, but just as we reached the threshold, the door slammed shut in our faces. What the... Jason grabbed the handle and yanked, but it wouldn't budge. He threw his weight against it, but it was like the door had fused to the frame. That's when we heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, and heavy, coming from the second floor. Jason's eyes darted to me. There's someone here, he whispered. No, I said, shaking my head. Not someone. Something. The footsteps grew louder, descending the staircase one deliberate step at a time. The air around us grew colder, and that metallic, blood-like smell intensified, clawing at the back of my throat. Jason grabbed a lamp from the side table near the door, raising it like a weapon. His knuckles were white, his breathing shallow. The footsteps stopped. We stared at the staircase, waiting, the silence stretching unbearably long. Then, a voice. It was deep, raspy, and completely unnatural, as if it came from something that had never been human. You shouldn't have come back. Jason dropped the lamp, and it shattered on the floor. Who's there? He shouted, his voice cracking. No response. Just silence. I took a step back, bumping into the wall, my pulse pounding in my ears. My phone. I remembered my phone. I fumbled in my pocket, pulling it out, and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the staircase. There was no one there, but the voice came again, this time from directly behind me. He's here now, I screamed, spinning around, the flashlight beam swinging wildly across the room. But there was nothing there. Jason grabbed me, shaking me. Ellie, we have to move. Windows, try the windows. We ran to the living room and tried the first window. Locked. The next one, jammed. The house was sealing itself, trapping us inside. And then I heard it. A deep, guttural growl that vibrated through the walls. It wasn't coming from upstairs anymore. It was coming from right in front of us. The flashlight beam landed on the corner of the living room, and my blood ran cold. The man from the mirror was standing there. Except now I could see him clearly. His face was pale and stretched unnaturally tight over his skull, as if he were a corpse long past its expiration date. His eyes were empty pits, oozing black, viscous liquid. His body was twisted, his limbs bending at impossible angles, and his mouth stretched into a jagged, toothy grin that seemed to split his face in half. He took a step forward. "Run," Jason whispered, but I couldn't move. The man tilted his head, his hollow eyes fixed on me. Then, in a voice that sounded like broken glass grinding together, he said, "You can't leave." Jason didn't wait for me this time. He grabbed the nearest chair and hurled it at the window. Glass exploded outward, and cold night air rushed in. "Ellie, let's go," he yelled, grabbing my arm and yanking me toward the shattered window. We climbed through, shards slicing at my legs and hands, but I didn't care. Jason pulled me to my feet, and we sprinted toward his Jeep. The house loomed behind us, dark and silent, but I swear I could still feel its eyes on me. Jason threw the car into drive, and we peeled out of the driveway, the tires screeching against the pavement. I didn't look back. We didn't stop driving until we were miles away, parked under the harsh fluorescent lights of a 24-hour diner. Jason sat in the driver's seat, gripping the wheel so hard his knuckles were white. I stared at my reflection in the window, my mind racing. What the hell just happened? Jason finally said, breaking the silence. "I don't know," I whispered, but deep down I did know. Whatever he was, whatever I had brought into that house, it wasn't over. Because when I glanced at my reflection in the window again, I saw him, standing right behind me, smiling. Jason's voice pulled me back to reality. "Ellie, Ellie, what are you staring at?" I blinked, and the reflection in the diner window was just that, my reflection. No shadowy figure, no hollow eyes, just my pale, shaken face staring back at me. Nothing," I muttered, shaking my head. "I'm fine." I wasn't fine. My skin felt like it was crawling, my heart refusing to settle. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting him to materialize out of the shadows. Jason rubbed his hands over his face, trying to piece things together. "Look, I don't know what the hell that was back there. A squatter? Some kind of gas leak making us hallucinate? I don't know, but whatever it is, we're not going back. Ever." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. But Jason wasn't done. "We have to tell someone. The cops, the city, someone." "No," I said quickly, my voice sharper than I intended. Jason frowned. "No? Ellie, that wasn't normal. That wasn't... They won't believe us." I snapped, my voice cracking. "What are we supposed to say? That a haunted house tried to kill us? That there was some thing standing in the corner? They'll think we're crazy." Jason leaned back in his seat, staring at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "You're scared," he said quietly. "No shit, Jason," I hissed, my voice shaking. "You saw what I saw. You heard him. He's here now. What does that even mean?" Jason was about to respond when his phone buzzed on the dashboard. We both froze. The screen lit up, displaying an unknown number. Jason grabbed the phone, hesitating before answering. "Hello." I watched his face closely. At first, he looked confused, then uneasy. Then his skin turned ashen. "Who is this?" he demanded, his voice low and trembling. I couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but whatever it wasn't good. Jason hung up abruptly and stared at the phone like it might bite him. "Jason?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Who was it?" He didn't answer. He just turned the phone toward me. On the screen was a single text message. "You shouldn't have left." We left the diner immediately, speeding out of the parking lot like we were being chased. Jason's knuckles were white as he gripped the steering wheel, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror every few seconds. "Where are we going?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hotel," Jason said. "Somewhere public. Somewhere with people." I nodded, clutching my phone like a lifeline. Every shadow we passed seemed to stretch longer than it should, every flicker of movement in the darkness making my pulse race. When we finally reached a budget hotel on the edge of town, I practically jumped out of the car before it even stopped. The lobby was brightly lit, the hum of the fluorescent lights oddly comforting. Jason paid for a room and we hurried inside, locking the door behind us and dragging a dresser in front of it for good measure. But the safety was an illusion, because when I pulled out my phone, there was a new notification. An email. It was from Airbnb. The subject line was blank, and the body of the email contained only one sentence. "You can't run." Jason and I barely slept that night. Every sound, every creak of the floorboards in the hallway outside made us jump. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone was pranking us. Maybe this was all some elaborate joke, a cruel trick to scare off guests. But deep down, I knew the truth. That house, that man, it had attached itself to me. By morning, Jason was adamant that we go to the police. "I don't care if they think we're nuts," he said, pacing the room. "Something isn't right, and I'm not waiting around for it to get worse." He wasn't wrong. But before we could leave, there was a knock at the door. Jason and I froze, staring at each other. No one knew we were here. The knock came again, louder this time. Jason grabbed a lamp from the bedside table, his makeshift weapon, and approached the door. "Who is it?" he called, his voice steady but tense. No answer. Another knock. Jason looked through the peephole and his face went pale. "What is it?" I whispered, creeping closer. It's you," Jason said, his voice barely audible. "What?" He stepped back from the door, his hands shaking. "Ellie, it's you." My heart stopped. I peered through the peephole, and my stomach turned. Standing on the other side of the door, staring back at me, was my own face. I stumbled back from the door, my breath catching in my throat. "What do you mean, it's me?" I whispered, though I'd already seen it with my own eyes. Jason just pointed to the door, his mouth moving but no words coming out. I didn't need him to explain. I could still see the image burned into my mind. It was me standing on the other side. My face, my hair, my clothes. But it wasn't right. The eyes were wrong. Empty. Hollow. Staring straight through the peephole as if it knew I was looking. And the smile, God, the smile. It stretched impossibly wide, splitting my face into something grotesque and unnatural. The knock came again. Harder this time, rattling the dresser we'd pushed in front of the door. "Ellie," Jason hissed. "What the hell is going on?" "I don't know," I whispered back, my voice shaking. "This can't be real. It can't be." The thing outside the door didn't wait for us to figure it out. The knocking stopped. For a moment, the silence was worse. Jason and I stood frozen, listening, our hearts pounding in unison. And then the voice came. "Ellie," it called in a perfect imitation of my own voice. Jason's head snapped toward me, his eyes wide. "That's you." "I know," I whispered, my legs trembling so badly I thought I might collapse. The voice came again, softer this time, almost playful. "Let me in, Ellie. You know you can't hide forever." Jason grabbed my arm. "We're leaving. Right now. We can't go out there," I snapped. And we can't stay in here. Jason fired back, his voice cracking. If that thing gets in, he trailed off, but we both knew how that sentence ended. The dresser in front of the door scraped loudly as he shoved it aside, his movements frantic. I wanted to argue, to tell him we needed a plan, but before I could say anything, Jason yanked open the door. There was nothing there. The hallway was empty, stretching out in both directions under the cold fluorescent lights. Jason didn't hesitate. He grabbed my wrist and pulled me out of the room, moving quickly toward the elevator. Come on, he urged. We just need to get to the car. Once we're out of here, we'll figure out what to do. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. We reached the elevator and pressed the button. The doors slid open immediately, and we stepped inside. Jason hit the button for the ground floor, and the elevator began its descent. But then it stopped. The lights flickered, and the elevator jolted to a halt between floors. What the hell? Jason muttered, jabbing at the buttons. None of them responded. And then, the overhead lights went out completely. We were plunged into darkness. The air in the elevator grew heavy, suffocating. I fumbled for my phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating Jason's pale face. Jason, I whispered, something's wrong. You think? He shot back, his voice shaking. But before I could respond, we heard it. The voice. Ellie. It echoed through the elevator, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Jason, do you see that? I asked, my flashlight beam trembling as it landed on the elevator doors. There was something on the metal surface, a reflection, but it wasn't ours. The man from the house stood there, his gaunt face twisted into that same horrifying grin, his hollow eyes staring straight at me. Ellie, he rasped, his voice like nails on a chalkboard. You can't leave. You brought me with you. No, I whispered, shaking my head. No, no, no. The reflection moved. Not like a normal reflection. It stepped out of sync with my flashlight's movements, leaning closer as if pressing against the glass from the other side. Jason yanked me back just as the elevator jolted violently, throwing us to the floor. And then the doors slid open. We were back in the hotel lobby. But it was wrong. The lights flickered, casting long, distorted shadows across the walls. The air was thick and cold, heavy with that same metallic scent from the house. Run, Jason whispered, pulling me to my feet. We bolted through the lobby, but the exit seemed farther away with every step, the distance stretching unnaturally. Behind us, I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate. Ellie? The voice called again, echoing off the walls. Jason didn't stop. He tightened his grip on my hand and barreled forward, dragging me through the doors and into the night air. But as we reached the parking lot, my heart sank. Every car was gone, except one, the black SUV from the house. Its headlights flicked on, blinding us. The engine roared to life, and the driver's door opened. The man stepped out. Only this time he wasn't alone. Standing beside him, their hollow eyes glowing faintly in the dark, were 5 figures. The same 5 figures I'd seen step into the cloud outside the house. And they were all smiling. Jason and I ran. We didn't stop until we were miles away, deep in the woods with no idea where we were or how to get back to civilization. But even now, as I sit here writing this, I can feel them. Watching. He was right. I brought him with me, and he's never going to leave. We thought we'd escaped, but deep down I knew better. I could feel it like a weight pressing on my chest. Wherever we went, whatever we did, he was there. Watching. Waiting. Jason and I sat in the woods, our backs against a massive oak tree, struggling to catch our breath. The night was silent, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that makes your ears strain for the faintest sound. Anything to reassure you that the world hadn't disappeared around you. Jason was staring into the darkness, gripping a heavy branch he'd picked up along the way. His face was pale, his jaw tight. Ellie, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. We can't keep running. We have to face this. No, I snapped. You saw what he is, Jason. We can't fight him. He's not human. Jason turned to me, his eyes filled with a desperation that mirrored my own. Then what do you suggest we do? Just sit here and wait for him to find us? I didn't have an answer. We stayed there for what felt like hours, too afraid to move but too terrified to stay still. And then, finally, the silence broke. It started as a low rustling, like leaves shifting in the wind. But there was no wind. Jason shot to his feet, holding the branch like a baseball bat. I stood, my legs trembling so badly I thought I might collapse. The rustling grew louder, closer. And then we saw them, the figures from the parking lot. They emerged from the shadows one by one, their movements slow and deliberate. Their hollow eyes seemed to glow faintly in the dark, their twisted smiles stretching impossibly wide. And behind them, stepping out of the darkness like it belonged to him, was him, the man from the mirror. He didn't move like the others. While they walked stiffly, like puppets on strings, he seemed to glide. His hollow eyes locked onto me, and that grin spread wider, splitting his face in two. "Ellie," he rasped, his voice echoing in my mind. "You can't run." Jason swung the branch in front of him, his hands trembling. "Stay back," he shouted. The man tilted his head, almost amused, and then raised his hand. Jason froze mid-swing, his body locking up as if an invisible force had taken control of him. His eyes widened in panic, and he turned to me, his voice a choked whisper. "Ellie, run." "No," I said, shaking my head. "I'm not leaving you. Run." Jason screamed, his voice breaking, but I couldn't move. The man's hand twitched, and Jason's body jerked forward, the branch falling from his grip. He dropped to his knees, his head tilted upward as if he was being forced to look at the man. And then Jason screamed. It was a sound I'll never forget. Pure, raw agony, like his very soul was being ripped apart. I finally found my legs and ran. I didn't look back. Couldn't. Jason's screams echoed in my ears as I tore through the woods, branches clawing at my skin and my lungs burning with every breath. I don't know how far I ran or how long I was out there, but eventually, the trees thinned, and I stumbled onto a desolate highway. I collapsed onto the asphalt, gasping for air, and for the first time the silence felt real. No footsteps, no voices. I was alone. A truck driver found me an hour later, shivering and bloodied on the side of the road. He took me to the nearest hospital, and when the police came to question me, I told them everything. Or at least I tried. They didn't believe me, of course. They chalked it up to stress, exhaustion, maybe even drugs. When they searched the woods where I said it had all happened, they found nothing. No house, no Jason, no sign that anyone had ever been there. It was like it had all been wiped clean. That was 3 months ago. I've tried to move on, to convince myself it wasn't real. But every night, when I close my eyes, I see him. And then there's the mirror. No matter where I go, there's always a mirror. In every hotel, every bathroom, every place I try to hide. And every time I see him, he's always there, standing just behind me, his hollow eyes locked onto mine. And he's always smiling. I know what you're thinking. Why am I telling you this? Why not just keep it to myself and hope it goes away? Because I think he's looking for someone new. So if you're reading this, and you hear a knock at your door, or see something in the corner of your eye that doesn't quite belong, don't look, don't answer, and whatever you do, don't bring him with you.